Lesson 10, Part 2 of the Constitution, specifically the Articles of the Constitution. The United States Constitution has 7 articles. 7. So after the preamble, which stated the 6 purposes and functions of this new Constitution, the Founding Fathers turned their attention to the first article, which was to create the legislative branch. This is Article 1, the United States Congress. Congress is the name of our national legislature. It is located in Washington, D.C., up on Capitol Hill, and it is bicameral, a result of the Great Compromise. So Article 1 provides for a legislature or a lawmaking branch of government. Article 1 stated that Congress would be made up of 2 houses or 2 chambers, an upper house called the Senate and a lower house called the House of Representatives. This is a bicameral legislature. And what that simply means is that we have 2 groups of legislators, 2 groups. One that makes up the Senate, a separate group, and another group that makes up the House of Representatives. Article 1 then describes how members of each house will be chosen, and very importantly, it lists the specific powers. These are the delegated powers that Congress does and does not have. Under the Articles of Confederation, the National Congress was very weak, had very little authority. Under this new Constitution, specific powers are enumerated in the Constitution, delegated to the Congress. A later lesson will detail these delegated powers. Article 2, the executive branch. Under the Articles of Confederation, there was not a national executive. Under the Constitution, we now have the office of President and Vice President. Of course, the President and the First Family lives in the White House, located on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., close to Capitol Hill. Article 2 provides for an executive or law enforcing branch of government. So the legislature makes the laws. The executive enforces the laws. Article 2 explains how the president and vice president are elected and how they can be removed from office as well. And Article 2 describes the presidential powers and responsibilities. A later lesson will focus on these presidential powers. Article 3, the judicial branch. So the first 3 articles created these 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, judicial. Article 3 provides for a judicial branch that will interpret the laws and see that they will be fairly applied. It called for the creation of 1 Supreme Court and such lower courts as Congress would deem appropriate. It lists the powers of the federal courts and describes the kinds of cases the federal courts hear. And again, we will have a lesson all on Article 3 and the Supreme Court and the federal court system. So Article 1, 2, and 3 creates the 3 branches of government: the lawmaking branch, the branch that enforces the laws, and Article 3, the judicial branch that interprets the laws. After creating the three branches of government, the Founding Fathers turned to the relationship between the states, Article 4. We referenced Article 4 in an earlier lesson, how each state must respect other states' laws, court decisions, and records. We call this the full faith and credit clause. Article 4 also explains the process of creating new states and promises that the federal government will protect and defend the states. Article 4, detailing the relationship between the states. So really, our Constitution is very logical in its structure. The first three articles create the first three branches of government. Then, the relationship between the states. In Article 5, how can we change the Constitution down the road, amending the Constitution? And it set forth two processes. On the left-hand side, we have a constitutional amendment that's proposed by a 2/3 vote of members of both houses of Congress, and then sent to the states for a 3/4 ratification of state legislatures. In 50 states today, that would be 38 states. So 2/3 of the members of both houses of Congress would have to agree to a joint resolution, a new constitutional amendment introduced through a joint resolution in both the House and the Senate. If it passes by a 2/3 vote, that amendment is then sent to the states, and the states have 7 years to ratify that amendment. And that's 3/4 of the states have to agree. So the big numbers or the big percentages to know are 2/3 proposal and then 3/4 ratification. On the right-hand side, there's another way in which our Founding Fathers created a system or mechanism to change our Constitution, and it's by having another national convention like we had in Philadelphia in 1787. This would be a national convention called at the request of 2/3 of the state legislatures. So on the right-hand side, Congress is not involved in proposing a new amendment or amendments. The National Convention would write or create these new amendments. They would still be sent to the states to be ratified by 3/4 of ratifying conventions. Notice not state legislatures, but ratifying conventions. This procedure on the right-hand side, the B side, this is the way our Constitution was actually crafted. It was done by National Convention and then ratified through ratifying conventions, not through the Congress and not through state legislatures. So these are the two ways that our Constitution can be amended. All 27 amendments have been added through the first mechanism, through congressional amendment and ratification by state legislatures. Article 6 states that the Constitution is going to be the supreme law of the land. If state laws or court decisions conflict with federal law, the federal law will prevail. This is what we call national supremacy in our federal system. Article 6 also states that all elected officials must take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, that no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any form of government, and a republican form of government shall be guaranteed to every state, a government of elected representatives, representative democracy. And that's basically it. Article 7 is the mechanism for how to approve the Constitution. It states that when 9 of the 13 states had ratified the Constitution, it would take effect. The first state to do so was Delaware, December 7th, 1787. Delaware, December 7th, 1787. The ninth state to do so was New Hampshire, June 21st, 1788, thus making the Constitution apply to all 13 states. By the way, North Carolina was a little bit behind the curve. We were the 12th state to ratify the Constitution. We were not part of the first 9 that were necessary to ratify it. And then Rhode Island was the last state of the original 13. Remember, Rhode Island did not even send delegates to Philadelphia to work on a new constitution or amend the Articles of Confederation. They were totally happy under the Articles of Confederation. So it makes sense that they were the last state to ratify the U.S. Constitution, May 29th, 1790. Some principles underlying the Constitution. I think we know many of these already from our earlier lessons. The concept of popular sovereignty, once again, the idea that the people are the source of the government's authority. We exercise our power by voting. Remember, voting is not a duty, but it is a responsibility of a good citizen to engage in democracy, take ownership in this democracy. We exercise our power by voting, popular sovereignty. Then, of course, Republican form of government. We have an indirect democracy or a republic in our country, a government of elected officials. Article 4, Section 4 guarantees a Republican form of government. And then, of course, the Constitution provides provisions for how members of Congress will be elected, as well as the president and the vice president. So, Republican government. Rule of law, going all the way back to the Magna Carta. The law applies to everyone, including those who govern. No one is above the law. And the Constitution limits government's power by specifying what it can and cannot do. Article 1, Section 9 are powers forbidden to Congress. Article 1, Section 10 are powers forbidden to the states. Article 1, Section 8 lists the 17 powers of Congress. So, again, we want to make this point that constitutional government is limited government. Fourth principle is the separation of powers. We have the 3 branches, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, establish the 3 branches of government, the legislative, the executive, the judicial. And then checks and balances. Each branch is able to limit or restrict the powers of the other 2 branches. And throughout this course, we will be examining ways in which each branch can do that. And of course, our Constitution created a federal system, federalism, the sharing of powers and responsibilities between different levels of government, a national government, state governments, and local governments. Again, think of federalism as vertical. Think of it as a wedding cake, different layers. And our Constitution created this system. That concludes Lesson 10, our overview of the Constitution. And our later lessons will be in deconstructing each of the articles in great detail. Thanks for paying attention.